they'll try to bully subs, not because they're trying to injure the subcontractor, but just because they're freaking busy. These guys have to get 26 contracts signed before this project can go, and you're just one of them. And if they have to redline every single one, you're gonna piss off that project manager. The people who feel like they're getting jammed up to just sign an agreement, they have to find their walkaway power. We all have it. We all have to realize that the GC needs us just as much as we need the GC.
Travis, really pleased to have you join us today. And we talk a lot on this show about how to be successful. And so not to be like, a downer or anything like that, but we're going to start out with a topic. What makes us fail a lot of times in the industry? Like what kind of things do we see that drive subcontractors to default, that make general contractors, subcontractors get to a place where businesses start to fail?
Yeah, I really like the question, Eddie, because I think we all just came through nearly a decade and a half of a bull market. And if you're a contractor in this market, you found a lot of ways to succeed and a few ways to fail, but that doesn't mean you're a great contractor. So looking at how contractors fail is a great lens to say, how do I improve and avoid that fate in the future? My background as a builder for 15 years, a civil engineer, and then getting into insurance kind of gives me a little bit different viewpoint as to how losses happen, how contractors go out of business. And then the way I look at it, it's not even just looking at contractors, actually looking at project success and how does a project succeed? Because a project has the owner, it has architects and a design team. It has a general contractor and then all the craft workers, all the trade contractors that make the project happen. And for me, a project is only a success if each one of those parties come out of it viewing it as a success.
Yeah. So, okay, let's get to some of the big reasons. Like what are some of the top ones?
Yeah. And let's talk about owners and what they care about, right? So the owner just wants a project delivered on time. They want a quality project and they want it for as cheap as humanly possible. And where do they fail? Owners really typically fail when they run out of money, and that can impact everybody downstream. So other than that, the project is out of their hands. General contractors fail. They have the most risk because they have all the execution risk. They have to plan the job. They have to have field management who's managing the sequencing and scheduling. They have to hire and pre-qualify the right trade contractors to execute the job. Each one of these steps, they have their own financial management. Each one of these steps can lead to failure for a general contractor. And then trade contractors, which is really where my heart and soul is to try and help them be successful. Trade contractors largely fail because they run out of money. Because let's face it, the subcontractors are the ones financing the project. They are laying out cash for materials and labor long before they get paid. And if they overextend themselves, that's where they run into the biggest problem.
Who's the right party to own the risk? Okay, so let's real quick, let's talk about what that means when we're setting up. Where does the risk go? Who's the right party? What can you say to that?
Yeah, the way I think of each project, Eddie, is I want all the participants to have success, and I want us to have an open communication about what is success for each party. And part of that open, honest conversation is being fair to the project participants and not assigning risk to a particular participant when they have no ability to manage that risk. And an example of that is a general contractor actually taking on the financing risk because they don't know if the owner qualifies for the financing. So how do you manage that? As a GC, you make sure the owner has the money to complete the job and you don't get halfway through it before you find out there isn't completed funding. If you're a subcontractor, you should be responsible for managing your scope of work and the safety of your trades. You should not be responsible for overall job site safety. So the advice I would give trade contractors when reviewing contract language is what am I responsible for by contract, and is that appropriate? If it's not appropriate, you definitely want to revise that contract language.
Was it you that told me that it's not too little work that kills a lot of people, but it's too much?
Yeah, common misconception. I mean, if I'm a concrete carpenter with 20 guys in the field, I am most worried about stacking up as many projects as I can to keep everybody busy, because I don't want somebody not being able to feed their family because I can't keep them busy. But in reality, if you stack up too much work, you overextend yourself. That's how most contractors fail. I'd say 70% fail because they have too much work to execute. And then they start hiring the B team and the C team, and they don't execute the work well. They don't manage their cash flow well, and they die of too big of an appetite rather than too small.
So it's too much work, which results in cash flow issues. Is that kind of the main problem?
Yeah, it can result in cash flow issues, inability to meet schedule. So they get in trouble on projects where they can't meet the schedule. They get thrown off a job. It can be poor quality. Sometimes you can execute 3 months worth of work because you have so many projects going with improper supervision. You get 3 or 4 months down the road before you've realized you've installed 10,000 square foot of roofing improperly, and you have to go tear it off and do it again.
Yeah, that's an area that I can feel personally, like where it's, you go out there and you sell, and then ultimately, yeah, your quality can suffer. You've got to fund all of the people going out there and doing that labor, doing that work, getting all the materials and supply, all of that stuff, all the travel, everything that goes into it. And then you get late paid, and then rut-row. It's a bad day. And that's what's funny is that I feel like most contractors, if we're going like more specialty contractors, subs, right? That is kind of the MO. It's to go out and sell as much as you possibly can. But that's a great call out there, Travis. Because they're kind of signing their own death warrant if they're not careful.
Absolutely. And part of the problem, right, is we have our head down in our business. We only know what we know in our business. And especially as contractors, it's funny I use that word contractors, but we can take a step back and figure out what that word actually means. We should call ourselves builders. Why do we call ourselves contractors? We say the word contractors because we have to write a contract to demonstrate this is exactly what I'm going to do for this much pay. And we have to sign a legal document saying that. The only reason why we had to do that is because too many people weren't executing on what they promised. Back in the day, people were builders. They built the job and the contract was an afterthought. Nowadays, the contract is the all-important document, and you sure hope your contractor is also a builder and they can actually build the work.
Right.
What kind of mentality might we run into in the general contractor realm that could be unhelpful? Like what do they think about it? Are they looking out for our best interest?
So yes and no, right? There's a lot of general contractors out there, and we definitely shouldn't generalize what their motives are. But again, I go back to looking at one individual project and how do you make that one project a success? Well, everybody has to be aligned on the same vision. If an owner is actually trying to get a building cheaper than they should, then and they don't value the successful outcome for other parties in the project, that is going to lead to a project going south. And that is, they're going to try to maybe have an incomplete design and then not approve change orders when they're warranted. Then you're going to get into a legal battle with the owner. They're going to maybe slow pay you or withhold payment and just want to fight a legal battle at the end of the project. Same thing with general contractors. A lot of general contractors want to see their trade partners succeed on the job. And I would say out of the ones I interact with, 90% are excellent at this. They view a successful project as everybody is able to have an opportunity to manage their scope of work and make a profit. Now, if you're a trade contractor and you don't manage your scope of work and you cause the project to be delivered late or the quality to suffer, then even the best contractor is going to hold you accountable, and they should. So So in terms of the motivations of a general contractor, this is how you select projects. So every one of your listeners who's a contractor out there has a go, no go philosophy on jobs. They look at a bid list, they see who their competitors are, they see who the general contractor is, what the project is, and they determine how excited they are to go after it. And I would say the biggest turnoff for me is you're not confident that the owner and the general contractor want to see you succeed. If they are selfish in nature, if they have a history of slow paying or bankrupting contractors, I wouldn't go work for that owner.
Yeah, I saw something showing cash flow just on the difference in payment terms between like 25 days, 30 days, and 45 days recently. And it's insane the amount that your pool of cash has to go up in order to finance a project. I mean, how much do the payment terms play into this? If I'm getting 30 or 60 or 90?
They're a huge factor in how much liquidity you have to execute the work. So I know a lot of very successful contractors who don't keep, in my eyes, they don't keep near enough cash in on their balance sheet. But what they do is negotiate excellent payment terms and hold their owners responsible for those payment terms. And it works for them. I think it's a significant risk, but it works for them. And then conversely, if you go work for the Department of Transportation or other large government entities and you're 90 days to pay or even later, you better have a lot of cash in the bank.
So when we connected, this whole topic of subcontractor default it's kind of something that really hit me because I've actually borne witness to this. I've seen very large subcontractor default in the midst of a very large project. And I mean, the picking up the pieces that happens afterward, like it's tough. Now,
can I ask a stupid question here?
Yeah.
I love stupid questions. So let me just throw this one out there. Subcontractor default. Can we just really
quick definitions?
Kind of just start there with some definitions. So I want to make sure everybody listening understands it.
What it is.
But also me. I want to make sure that I've got my head wrapped around it too. Yeah.
Well, it's a broad term and it's thrown around quite a bit. So
right.
We already talked about how we call ourselves contractors because we have to abide by these written agreements between every party. So in every contract, you've got an upstream and a downstream party. So let's just take the contract between general contractor and subcontractor. In that contract, the general contractor will pay the sub a stipulated amount of money for a particular scope of work. And the sub has all the contractual obligations they then have to fulfill. Default just means that subcontractor is not fulfilling their obligations. And it's a defined term in the contract, whether it's late delivery or it's quality terms or it's not paying suppliers. All of those are reasons for subcontractor default.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for the clarity around that.
Yeah. And Eddie, you asked what is the insurance for that? There is something called SDI, subcontractor default insurance. And to understand that, we really got to go into bonding and some surety kind of background. But if I'm a trade contractor out there these days, I am getting hit up by my general contractors saying, hey, Travis, I want to look at your financials. Share with me your resume, essentially saying that you can execute this work. What software do you use? What does your accounting department look like? They're really getting into my business to figure out if I can do the work or not. And that feels invasive to a lot of contractors.
Yeah, there's kind of two sides of this. One is I think we could, and like you said, we've got a lot of territory to cover, but we could get into why some projects require a bond and some don't. I want to start there, but I also want to get out of there into how do we set ourselves up for success as a sub, opening those books up and not feeling uncomfortable about it. So why don't we start off though, like why do we see a bond on some projects? We don't see a bond on others.
Yep.
What even is that bond for?
Yeah, great question. And we'll try and be as brief in the background as we can and then dig into the details of how to help contractors be successful. So in the surety world, so a surety bond, most of your listeners probably get a licensed contractor bond for their state, right? So that's a very simple bond, costs you a few $100, and it just tells the state that you're going to be a responsible contractor. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about payment and performance bonds, which is a specific type of surety bond. And there's federal legislation, and then there's also state legislation that requires that public funded projects be bonded. This is where the bonding requirement comes from. And what that bond will say is, let's say your Department of Transportation issues a $100 million contract to build a new bridge over a river. What it's going to say is the general contractor on that project must be bonded in order to ensure that the public money is used well. They're not going to abscond with the money and fail to deliver the project. So then you enter this whole different class of entity to the construction world, which is surety companies. Surety companies are very similar to insurance companies. Sometimes they share both functions. They have deep pockets, and they say, we know ABC Contracting, and we're going to guarantee to the state of Georgia that ABC Contracting will build that bridge. And then the surety, obviously, if they're putting their money where their mouth is, they're going to do their due diligence to ensure that ABC Contracting can indeed fulfill the contract. And what that is involving is, do they have the money? Do they have the right people and resume to execute the work? Do they have the character? They're going to stand behind the contract that they sign rather than, when things get tough, turn around and say, well, I check out. I'm not going to do the work. So that's where surety bonds came from. You'll see them sometimes on private work. Let's say a large development with diverse funds coming into it. You'll see it on affordable housing projects. So really, it's from the owner side and sometimes the government side that requires the bond, and then everybody below has to comply.
So that's insurance, but I'm going to do what I say, finish what I've signed up to start.
It is. And what's important to note for everybody who hasn't really gone through the bonding world is it's very different from insurance. Let's say insurance, we're all familiar with car insurance. You get in a car accident and your car insurance company writes a check for $50,000 to replace your car. Maybe it's the car you hit. They don't then come knock on your door, Eddie, and say, Eddie, I spent $50,000. You need to pay me back the $50,000. That is exactly how surety works, though. Surety, if you are the contractor and you are applying for a bond, you're going to sign an agreement to the bonding company saying, I will reimburse you for any losses you have because I screwed up. Now, what that means is if a surety has to step in and complete a contract for you, and they spend $1 million completing that contract, they're going to knock on your door and they're going to say, hey, Eddie, let's work out a payment plan. How about you give me access to your stocks and bonds and your cash accounts? And they're going to want their $1 million back. So that's very different from insurance.
That is very different from insurance.
Wow.
Now, okay,
Yeah.
subcontractor default insurance, let's go to that side of the equation.
Yeah, but
let's hit that now.
And I'm glad we covered surety before we just tried to define it, because it doesn't make sense unless you've already understood surety. So surety is that guarantee that this third party will step in with deep pockets and solve a problem if a contractor fails. That's what surety is. Typically, the general contractor level is where 95% of the surety happens. They buy surety bonds to supply to the owner saying they'll finish their work. In some cases, the general contractor will require a bond of their key subcontractors. So again, you get to that $100 million bridge and you've got a $20 million sub agreement with the asphalt paving company or the structural concrete company. If that's a separate company, you may say, hey, buddies, I want you to be bonded because I'm bonded upstream. I'm going to bond you downstream. So that's a subcontractor bond. Subcontractor default insurance is a product that has evolved much more recently than bonds to take the place of a sub bond. And I would say it's important to know the subcontractor default insurance world is a business opportunity, just like all other business opportunities. Hey, there's profit in that line of business. I'm going to write an insurance product that is going to take the place of a bond because I think I can make money on that insurance product. And the reason why that is, I already mentioned, sureties do a really good job of pre-qualifying contractors before they issue a bond. Well, surety loss ratios are extraordinarily low in history. If you do a really good job pre-qualifying a contractor and your requirements are very high before they go bid that work and get a bond, then you're guaranteeing that your loss experience, like the fact that they might default, is extraordinarily low. So what you've got in subcontractor default insurance is now you've got an insurance product that is saying, hey, if we do the pre-qual right, because it's all on the pre-qualification, if we do that part right, our subs are not going to fail. And the little known secret about subcontractor default insurance is most of it out there is actually a wholly owned product by the general contractor. So not to pick on any big names, but all these big national firms that we've all seen building the big mega projects, their subcontractor default insurance is a profit center for their company. And I don't think it's a scam or a bad thing at all, because they're providing a service in lieu of a subcontractor bond and they are taking risk. But make no mistake, it is a profit center for their business.
So they're gathering the premium.
Yep.
They're putting that in a pool.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Then they're pre-qualifying this group of subcontractors that they are collecting premium from, and then they're using that pool to mitigate their own risk should somebody default.
Correct.
Pretty fair?
Absolutely fair. And the reason why they can self-insure that is they have a lot of projects. If you've got a $10 billion backlog and you go build a $600 million football stadium, might as well use that aggregated backlog to create subcontractor default insurance for each one of your subs on that football stadium. And then, by the way, if I'm the general contractor, I'm guaranteeing to the owner there will be no subcontractor defaults because I'm doing all the pre-qualification and I am self-insuring that subcontractor default insurance. So you, Mr. Owner, should pay me 1% or some number for the guarantee that there's not going to be any sub defaults.
So they're collecting on both sides.
They're collecting on both sides.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh.
Well, and you can
Cool.
you can imagine these big international or even just national sized general contractors building the mega projects. They're doing it for, maybe a cost plus 2% fee basis, right? Why not make an extra 1% on the subcontractor default insurance?
Yep, 1% on that kind of money looks pretty good,
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
especially when you're only making 2 to begin with.
Yep.
Trying to make up ground where you can. Who could blame them?
Hey,
Well, and I guess you look at the motives too, right? The motive is there's a profit motive, but also who knows how to pre-qualify subcontractors better than a GC?
Right.
I would say if it's done right and they have the right personnel, they're the perfect people to pre-qualify subs. What happens though is people get lazy. Not all the pre-qualification is done perfectly. They think there's this financial mechanism that'll solve problems. So, it's not the guy who created or the gal that created the pre-qual program that fails. It's the person they trained, who trained the next person, who trained the next person. Then the whole operation might fall down. And so you've seen a subcontractor default, which resulted in probably financial problems for the owner, the general contractor, a late project being delivered. It's a massive problem.
well, and in that instance, devastation for the subcontractor to the point of that's all she
Kaput.
wrote, right? It wasn't just the project.
I was kind of track with me on this and tell me if I'm wrong here, but this is almost kinder to the subs than a bonded program, right? In that if the subcontractor defaults under this sort of insurance policy by the GC, then the GC can see that and cut funding or cut any other invoices that might go out and basically cut their losses and say, okay, you're fired. And then somebody's not showing up at Jim Bob's door with a crowbar getting ready to knock their kneecaps in because they owe him $1 million, like with the bonded program, right? Dummy here trying to understand a complex issue, but is that roughly the right area?
Can I rephrase?
Sure. Please do. Yes.
In surety, you owe it back. Is the same true with the SDI?
Yes. So good rephrasing, because in neither case is somebody coming with a crowbar. But In surety, you have pledged all of your personal assets that you will indemnify the surety company. So they won't come and take your home. There's a Homestead Act. They won't typically take your means of producing an income, so like your primary car or something like that. But they could sure take your stocks and bonds and the money you have in a bank account. That's how a surety works. The insurance contract is not written that way. So while you might say, excellent, this is more favorable to me as a subcontractor, the downside of that is you did sign an agreement to execute a scope of work for the contractor. You're still going to go to court, and the court could still award some financial damages that you then have to make right with your personal financials. It's a less direct way to access your personal financial wealth, but it's still on the hook because you signed the contract.
Which is fair. Like, I mean, that's the risk you take by signing a contract. Either way you look at it, too, no matter the size.
I agree with that.
Perform the work, or there's problems.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the help there, guys. I needed a minute because I was yeah.
All right. So the next step is knowing this is the world in which we live. How can you help us understand how to operate in it better so that we can get ourselves in a good position to be a qualified subcontractor?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And that's exactly what I'm imagining owners of subcontracting companies, trade contractors, that's why they're listening to your show. So how do you put them in a better position? They need to understand that the contract they sign is the single most important risk management document or step that they can possibly execute. So I know a lot of subs who send in a quote. The quote has a page or two of clarifying documents. Hey, this is my scope. This is what my scope is not. Like, this does not include X and Y and Z. And then the general contractor creates a subcontract document, does not include or incorporate the bid document, but it does have a scope that looks generally right, but maybe the subcontractor is just so busy he's not really reading it. He just has a lot of trust, and he signs the agreement. He may or may not know payment terms. He may or may not know that the scope is exactly correct. He may be tying himself to unfair dispute resolution practices in the event that there's a change order dispute. There's a whole lot of things that if you don't mind the contract, you could get in a lot of trouble. So step one, to answer your question, Eddie, is use that contract as your opportunity to manage your risk.
Okay, so diligent in the contract. Next step is what?
Next step, I would say, and this goes for people who aren't in the status quo. If you're just status quo and you're doing the same agreements for the same general contractors you've done for the last 10 years, manage that contract and keep doing the same work. But really now I'm getting in the mindset of the folks who want to grow and the folks who have a growth mentality. And I would say the best thing you can do is surround yourself with, 2, 3, 4 people who you count as business advisors. And that can be other contractors who you've grown a relationship with, and they've attained the level you want to achieve, or they're a general contractor who wouldn't mind being a mentor to you as you grow your business. Because general contractors have a long-term motive to see their subcontractors succeed as well, not just a short-term project motive, but they want a great roofer to stick around for the next 10 years. So how can I help that great roofer run a better business? I can be a mentor to them. So seek out those business advisors. And it might be your CPA, it might be your banker, it might be your contract attorney. Please use one when you're reviewing contracts. And it could be your insurance broker or your surety broker. And each one of them doesn't have to sit on your board of advisors. But gosh, 2 or 3 or 4 would be worth its weight in gold, because you can then have a resource who knows your company. And when you're going to pursue something a little outside of your wheelhouse, or you have a question, you raise your hand and you say, can we go get coffee? Can we go get lunch and talk about this business move I'm about to make before I make a potentially very positive or very negative decision?
Yeah, we see when we get to the contract part of the conversation, many times the subcontractors feel like they've lost some leverage, like they just have to sign what's put in front of them. There can be a little downward pressure put by, the general contractor to do so because obviously they've presented it and they want it signed as is. But we've always noticed that most of those contracts they say they're jointly drafted.
Yeah, correct.
Diligence in that to make it legitimately jointly drafted, it does mean that both sides do need to have a say.
Review. Yeah.
Yeah.
And GCs they'll try to bully subs, not because they're trying to injure the subcontractor, but just because they're freaking busy, right? These guys have to get 26 contracts signed before this project can go, and you're just one of them. And if they have to redline every single one, you're going to piss off that project manager. But to your point, the people who feel like they're getting jammed up to just sign an agreement, they have to find their walkaway power. We all have it. We all have to realize that the GC needs us just as much as we need the GC.
Yeah, that gets lost. I mean, the general contractor wants you, if you're a good qualified sub that does quality work and has a good number, it's not like they want you to walk to where they have to go to tier number 2.
That can take some time to establish for sure. I want to echo what you just said here, Travis, because this is so critical. This is so critical. I've felt this personally where I've signed contracts as a result of people just saying, all right, yeah, no, well, this is just what we do. And a lot of times when you're starting out, you definitely make concessions. Like when you're just getting going as any form of contractor, you make concessions. You say, this is a much bigger organization. I have no bargaining power. And so to just send this back home, like from somebody who has felt this pain of crap, I cannot believe I signed that. And 6 months later, I'm feeling the pressure. I'm feeling the issues arise. And it's not all due to me. It is also on them. It is so important to have that contract language established. And it's so important to stay frosty with this stuff, and especially on the payment terms. If you are not looking at your payment terms, you're in for a hard day, or at least not cash flow planning for those payment terms. So yeah, this is so critical. I don't want this to get lost. So I'm just bringing this back up, Travis. This is great advice, and people need to hear this.
I think you're spot on, and I should also not gloss over what I mean when I say a construction attorney or a contract attorney. There's a lot of different types of attorneys out there, and there's some who you'll talk to, and they're a generalist, a business attorney, and you'll say, hey, do you do construction agreements? Oh, yeah, I can do that. But their learning curve is going to be steep because it's 5% of their business or 10% of their business. So all of the people listening to this need to understand there are people that only specialize in construction contracts. Go find one of those, because in your first engagement with them, you will spend, $500 or $700 to have them get to know your company and review your first agreement. But that is going to save you a ton of money in the long run. Tyler, to your point, whether it's payment terms or it's dispute resolution or change order processing, whatever it is, you need to make sure that the contract is not one-sided. And then for the future benefit of your company, they're going to charge you a 15-minute or a half an hour review for all these future contracts. You get a generalist business attorney. First, they don't know what they're looking at. And second, they're going to take 5 or 10 hours to research and understand how they should best respond to you, because they want to do it right. They just don't have the expertise. So not all attorneys are created equal.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And I mean, yeah, get a specialist, somebody that knows the industry really, really well. You are ultimately going to spend way less with that. And man, $600-$700 to save massive amounts of heartburn, sleepless nights, hair loss, all this stuff that comes with, a contract going sideways or you realizing too late. Like that's an insurance policy just in that, in that, like, I'm not going to be paying the piper later on, or I'm limiting my risk on this. Also, it's very helpful to have somebody who knows and sees a lot of these contracts who can come back to you and say, hey, listen, I see a lot of these and these payment terms are garbage. Like, how great would that feel if you had somebody come and tell you that stuff and back you up? You know, you don't feel as bad going back to that bigger company saying, no. If we're going to do it, it's going to be like this. If you have that person in your back pocket telling you and guiding you along the path. So yeah, just kind of linking that together there. But yeah, this hits home for me, man. This seriously.
All right. So once we've got the advisors established
Right.
in our lives and in our businesses, good mentorship is the next step. Like, are we trying to establish our financials? Are we looking at our personnel? Like, what's kind of next priority?
Yeah, well, still looking through that advisor lens, here's how I might answer that is the next most important thing is you need to have your bookkeeping and accounting processes dialed in so that it's not all on you, the business owner, unless where you live is in front of your computer screen instead out in the field. So business owners for trade contractors come in two types, right? They're either the builder, they're the ones doing the work, and the office stuff is whenever I can get to it. And that's one type. And the other type is I'm going to manage my business like an accountant would manage it, but maybe they're not as connected to the field. Those are the two types I see. And then the most successful trade contractors, without exception, they have both of those, either as owners or one of them is a very valued key person, right? So let's talk about the financial piece. If you can marry from when you estimate the job to when you're actually doing the work and you're measuring productivity against that estimate and you're billing appropriately and keeping track of changes appropriately, all of that in real time, that puts you in the top 5% of contractors in my book. And that will ensure that you're not surprised at some future date about all of this lost productivity. You know, your crews were going in the wrong direction. They were using the wrong detail or the wrong fastener type. And then you have to do a bunch of rework. So minimizing rework because you're on top of productivity and on top of your billings, that's huge. And how can you do that? You have a great construction CPA that actually can come into your business and spend 2 or 3 hours and audit your processes and say, you're right on track, Eddie. You're doing all the right things. Or they can raise their hand and they can say, you know, look at that 8-inch stack of bills on your desk, Eddie. Maybe you should hire a bookkeeper. Maybe you should have somebody who's managing that work in real time and create some processes around your financial management. That's huge.
The work on the business versus work in the business
Yeah.
thing definitely comes to mind as you're building those processes out so that you can actually think about building.
You're making your business more valuable if you're doing some of these things.
Well, for
the record, like, it's not just making your life better. It is making your life better, but you are making your business way more valuable and also way more appealing to GCs looking to work with you, right? Like anybody looking to hire you. If you have some of these systems in order, they see, oh, wow, they're put together. They know what they're doing. They're not rookies. And it kind of takes some of the edge off and say, like, all right, well, it's not as risky to hire them as maybe somebody over here who doesn't have these processes mapped out.
Yep, I would agree with that. I think you can fail on both sides though, and I wouldn't sleep on working in the business either, especially as a craft or trade contractor. I actually see some people come into contracting and see it as a huge business opportunity, and I'm going to build the framework of the business and the systems and processes, and they actually have no idea how the hammer is swung or what is actually installed in the field because they went to business school and they see the opportunity, but they don't know how the work gets done. So then they go through and cycle through hiring foreman and general foreman, craft leadership that doesn't actually execute in the field. So you have to marry both. You have to know how the work gets done and build systems so that you can scale the business.
It's a good word.
Slow, smooth is fast.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna begin to lock in our financials. We're gonna have our mentors. We're gonna get our CPA, our construction CPA in. We're going to start getting our books right. That should have a good impact on the feeling. Can we talk about that just a minute? I mean, you said, this, I don't know how you put it. This starts to feel like somebody's getting in your kitchen.
Yeah.
If you're speaking of it in the Southern vernacular. Somebody's in your kitchen and they're looking at things you don't feel like you should have to show them to do work for them.
Yeah.
So what's the word on that?
I would say trust your gut, because there's some companies who are not great business partners who want to add you to the list of qualified subcontractors, but they're maybe not a win-win type of general contractor. They're more of a taker kind of general contractor. And if they bankrupt 2 or 3 subs on this large project, that's not a real big concern for them. That's not who I would give my financials to. But once you've evaluated that this general contractor, they're good people, I have a connection with, one of the operations managers or project managers, and I feel like if I went to work for them, I would be treated well. And I just need to get through this darn pre-qualification process. If you've gotten comfortable with wanting to work for them, I've got no problem here. You're right to demand that they keep it very private. Some of these contractors use a screening intermediary so that the project manager that's evaluating ABC plumbing and they're evaluating XYZ plumbing, they don't know the financials of both. They actually use somebody else to evaluate that and just give them a score. That works nicely. Because if you work in a small community, like I live in a small community, these contractors don't want everybody else to know their business and know how healthy they are or how healthy they aren't. So demand that the contractor keep a lot of this private. It's a dialogue, I would say. I don't think they give you a list and they say, you have to comply. And if you don't check every box, I don't want to talk to you. Give them what you can give them and have a conversation. And they're going to try to collect everything they can. But at the end of the day, if you're valuable to them and you don't want to give a personal financial statement, they'll probably still hire you and qualify you. So engage in the dialogue, knowing that what they have a job to do too. They want to limit their risk on the job. And if you can get over that hurdle, you've created passed through a barrier to entry that, if there's 20 HVAC contractors in your valley, maybe 3 of them get pre-qualified. That's a lot better odds of picking up the next job with that general contractor if you're pre-qualified.
Give us the profile of that subcontractor. What's the profile of the successfully pre-qualified sub? Just high level earmarks. Yeah.
So being honest about what's your single largest job, what's your backlog look like? Actually having that, if you're doing $8 million of work a year and that takes you 25 construction projects a year, have some process that shows that you track that, and that you have a past history of project profitability and that you have a healthy backlog ahead of you. Good general contractors are going to monitor your backlog because they don't want you to take on too much work because they know that's a single leading cause of failure for subcontractors. So you have to be able to demonstrate this is my backlog. This is what I have for work in progress. They can tell you who their key foreman or general foreman are. Maybe they even have a little one sheet with a paragraph on their work experience and what makes them a great foreman. And then that subcontractor has great references. So the general contractor wants to see that you've worked for, 3 or 4 other quality GCs and delivered projects. That would be the general profile of a good trade contractor.
So we spoke a little bit with Brian. He wanted us to cue you up a little bit on if I have that profile, like what kind of latitude do your insurance companies have in premium? Like how can I impact my premium by being a well-qualified sub?
Yeah. So, now you're getting into a completely different world talking about insurance and insurance underwriting. A lot of that insurance underwriting doesn't go into financial qualifications or all the things sureties care about. But you asked a really important question is, how are you graded in the insurance world? How do insurance underwriters look at you? And then the price of your insurance, how subjective is it? Or is it just a formula and everybody pays something of the same formula? So that's a great question. It's, pulling up the curtain and showing you, through the window and how the sausage gets made. So insurance underwriters, it varies by line of coverage, whether it's, general liability, pollution liability, professional, auto liability. But as a general rule, underwriters have more freedom than you might think to decide your premium. And the better the underwriter, the more sophisticated they are and the more they understand their niche, just like talking about an attorney who specializes in construction. If an underwriter specializes in construction and they have a track record of profitable book management in the insurance world, then they have more latitude to offer you to differentiate between two like contractors, one with a good underwriting resume and one with maybe a blank slate. I don't know if they're good or bad. I'm just presented with the numbers and an application. So this guy who I know a lot about, I could price 20, 30, 40% cheaper than this guy because I know all the details that's going to lead me to believe they're a better risk and a better contractor. And those can be almost immeasurable details. Not how much money do they have in their bank account and what's their average project size, but maybe it's, they've got a 30-year history in their community and a great narrative on what types of projects and how they internally manage risk. You can pay a lot less for your insurance than the same looking contractor from the outside.
30%. When we're talking, large contractors, play that out for me. How much could something like this, you can give me a range of how much something like this could cost. So, if we're reducing it by 30%, how much is that? Because I can imagine, but I would love to hear kind of some maybe rough examples.
Yeah, so let's take a roofer, which is a high risk trade. If you're going to insure a roofer's general liability, you can imagine the amount of callbacks and the amount of construction defect claims you get on a bad roofer. So insurance carriers, first of all, most of them don't want to insure roofers. So the ones that do want to insure roofers, I have small roofers with not great histories paying, let's call it 1.9% of their revenue goes to general liability. That's a terrible rate. But if you do $5 million of work as a roofer and nearly 2% is going to your GL costs, that's a lot of money. Is that $100,000?
Yeah.
Do that math right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I've also got roofers. Now these are a little larger, but they're well established. They have a history of no losses and they're paying 0.7%. For the same coverage. It's general liability coverage. Now, these are a little bit apples to oranges because one might be a $5 million a year company and one might be a $20 million a year company. But still, it's a, 0.7% to 1.9 is the range there for that roofer.
And that's not on the basis of necessarily their size as much as it is some of these other factors.
Yeah, and part of it is their size and part of it's the other factor. So I'm trying to thinking in my head here for another great example of underwriting freedom. So great concrete carpenter in California that I worked with recently, where they were before, their workers' compensation costs through the carrier they were going through before was $70,000 a year. And for the same payroll, we just moved them to somebody else for $38,000 a year. And all that was a move from maybe not the best carrier, not specializing in construction, to one that I know very well. I know the underwriter has a lot of freedom. And I had a great narrative for that company to get that underwriter confident that they were a great company. And they had a great loss history. I mean, credit goes to these companies that they managed their work well, right? So they weren't losing a bunch of money to work comp claims. But that saved them $20,000.
Wow. Dang.
Yep.
I mean, it's worth paying attention to for sure. I'd take 20.
It definitely is worth paying attention to. And it just goes back to making
Yeah.
sure your advisors are experts, right? I mean, just not going with, hey, all insurance brokers are the same, all bankers are the same. Absolutely not. Find an expert in the field you're looking for. Something came up though. I don't want to forget about this. When we were talking about contracts and we were talking about utilizing an expert and finding an expert, I've got a great example here that I think will drive this point home. And I think it'll resonate with all the trade contractors out there. So if you're seeing a contract that has, 30 pages of requirements, one of those pages is going to have insurance on it, right? So, okay, in this case, I'm a roofer. I'm going to be doing a large school project, and it says I need a $5 million umbrella as a roofer. I've never carried any umbrella. Maybe I've carried 1 million of umbrella. What's the first thing I do is I send my bid in, and the second thing I do is I call the project manager on that job for the general contractor, and I say, I don't have that insurance, man. If you want me to have it, it's going to cost a lot. And then that conversation is usually stopped and started 3, 4, 5 times through the bidding process. And then they finally award it to the low bidder who doesn't meet the insurance qualifications. Okay. I sell insurance for a living. I'd love everybody to buy all the insurance that they can possibly buy, but maybe it doesn't make sense for that roofer to buy that $5 million umbrella because of their scope of work. Please, everybody listening, document the fact that you don't comply with that contractual requirement. Get it in writing, preferably get it in a contract change order that they are no longer requiring it. So the case I'm talking about was here in Oregon. Unfortunately, that roofer had one of their employees fall from heights, major claim, and they didn't comply with the contractual document, and they had no acceptance by the general contractor for that non-compliance. So they should have had $5 million. They only had a $1 million umbrella, and the $4 million difference, and this was a claim that far exceeded $5 million. The $4 million difference, now the owner of the roofing company is going to court, and they're going to have a personal judgment against that roofing company owner. Likely, this will take years to play out because they signed a contract requiring the higher limit and they didn't provide it.
Dang.
Yeah. And this kind of stuff, minding the contract goes back to that, and having it, if you don't know whether you comply with everything, send it to your insurance broker and make them look at it.
All right, Travis. Well, dude, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for all these insights. This is great. So I want to ask you a megaphone question though. All right. So if I gave you a megaphone in around 60 seconds to say something to the construction world, what would you want to say?
Man, that's a big question, Tyler. I would express my gratitude for the career I had in construction. And I'm so thankful I still get to serve the construction industry and what I do now. My insurance practice is solely focused on construction. And I would tell all the contractors out there, I know that it's a hard job. I know that it's a grind, but you should feel like your work is valued. It's so important to society that we have a strong construction industry. Know that you're supported by trade organizations, by specialty service providers, whether it be bankers, CPAs, attorneys, insurance brokers. We all want to see you succeed. There's a lot of people out there who don't do business the right way, but seek out the ones who do. Get advice from them, bring them into your company and treat them as a business partner, and your success will have nowhere to go but up.
Love it. Travis, dude, appreciate you coming on here and spitting bars, we'll say, as these kids say these days.
Nice. Well, thank you, guys.